Honestly, I think that I was just trying to avoid it, pretending like these issues didn't exist. And then once those issues slap you in the face, you really have no choice but to come to terms with what's really going on. And so I'm just going to be 100% honest. I mean, I remember when the BLM protests began in 2020. Obviously, in the beginning, I was very supportive of those protests, but every night they would quickly devolve into riots. And I remember messaging with friends, even messaging with colleagues about being fearful because, where I live is very close, like walking distance to, a main boulevard where a lot of the rioting took place. And on one hand, here I am in my personal life, seeing the injustice of all of these small, in my community, Latino-owned businesses being completely crushed.
Kasparian has just dropped a major revelation, and the progressive left is scrambling to respond. For years, she was a prominent figure in progressive media, a passionate voice on the Young Turks, staunchly defending left-wing ideals and challenging conservatives. But now, she's refusing to stay silent. In a candid and unsparing critique, Kasparian is calling out the hypocrisy, censorship, and rigid ideological litmus tests that she says have overtaken the modern left. From the unrest of 2020 to the growing pressure of audience-driven narratives, she's revealing how progressive media often suppresses dissent from within. She's not pulling any punches, and if you've ever wondered why many left-leaning voices hesitate to speak openly, this is a wake-up call.
Reform our property and commercial property tax code in California, which people don't know this. We have very high sales taxes, very high income taxes, but like almost a medieval commercial tax property situation with Prop 13. Try to reform that, they call you a racist. So it's taking this language from the social justice left to the point where none of these words seem to mean anything. They're used by the oligarchs, by the people in power. And it took me. I have kind of had an incremental march here from writing for the Nation, writing for kind of more institutional left-wing outlets to, I still have a lot of these values. I have a lot of these beliefs and concerns, but I feel I'm with you. The Unaligned is a great Substack name, by the way, because I feel unaligned. Could you talk a little bit about your journey? Like, what were there certain moments where you said, what's going on here?
So a lot of different things happened. And, I think there's this misconception that a few things happened to me personally, and that was all it took for me to, have a reactionary response. And that is not the case. Those personal things that happened to me forced me to come to terms with some very real flaws that I was seeing on the left. But honestly, I think that I was just trying to avoid it, pretending like these issues didn't exist. And then once those issues slap you in the face, you really have no choice but to come to terms with what's really going on. And so I'm just going to be 100% honest. I mean, I remember when the BLM protests began in 2020. Obviously, in the beginning, I was very supportive of those protests, but every night they would quickly devolve into riots. And I remember messaging with friends, even messaging with colleagues about being fearful because, where I live is very close, like walking distance to, a main boulevard where a lot of the rioting took place. And on one hand, here I am in my personal life, seeing the injustice of all of these small, in my community, Latino-owned businesses being completely crushed. They lose everything, right? And of course, there's this BS excuse of,
Kasparian's move away from the progressive left is a story of growing disappointment that many former leftists understand. At first, she fully supported the 2020 Black Lives Matter protests, believing in their goal of fighting racial injustice. But as the protests turned into nightly riots, she began to face a difficult truth. While the national focus stayed on police violence, her own community was being damaged. Small businesses, many owned by Latino immigrants, were looted and destroyed. When she spoke out about this, she felt stuck. Stay quiet to avoid being called racist, or tell the truth and risk losing her job and friends. For a long time, she kept her concerns to herself. But over time, the problems within the movement became too clear to ignore. Her frustration wasn't just personal, it was about how progressive ideas often ignored the real effects on people's lives. Kasparian says the issues go deeper than just bad policies. In progressive media, she says, many commentators don't truly believe what they say. She points to people like Destiny, David Pakman, and Hassan Piker, who she believes know that going against progressive views could cost them followers, money, and support. Because of this, many left-wing media figures stay in a bubble where questioning important topics, like crime, gender, or the economy, brings backlash. Kasparian doesn't think these people are stupid, just stuck. The pressure to keep their audience is stronger than the drive to be honest. This, she says, has created a media world where people are afraid to speak freely, and only one way of thinking is allowed.
Right? But no, it's not that simple. Okay. But, watching my own community fall apart and then going on my show, and if I'm completely honest, like terrified of even bringing any of that up, because I understood the injustice and agreed that something needed to be done about the injustice toward George Floyd and individuals like him. But I was also terrified that if I brought up things like riots, I would automatically be assumed to be some sort of hateful bigot or racist. And I'm just not. I just see the damage that's being done to my community and communities across the country as all of this is going on. So I dealt with that conflict for a little while, and I felt pretty disgusted with myself because I want to be honest with the audience, but there was also some self-preservation involved because I didn't want people to do to me what they're doing now, actually. And then finally, it just got to a point where I couldn't take it anymore. Like, I saw what was happening and I needed to be honest about it. Obviously, things happened to me as well. But more importantly, there was a disconnect between progressive policymakers and legislators and what their constituents wanted. And they just ignored their own constituents. A perfect example is...
Kasparian talks about how progressive politicians are often out of touch with the people they say they represent. She points to Representative Ilhan Omar as an example. Even though many black residents in Omar's district didn't want to cut police funding, Omar and other progressives pushed for it anyway, putting their political beliefs ahead of what their communities actually wanted. Kasparian also brings up what happened in Glendale, California. There, many Armenian and immigrant parents were upset about parts of the gender curriculum in public schools. Instead of listening or having a real conversation, Democratic politicians and progressive activists quickly labeled them as fascists and bigots. Kasparian argues that this shows a deeper problem on the left. Many leaders care more about looking morally superior than about understanding and representing the concerns of working class and minority communities.
Of Ilhan Omar from Minnesota. So her district demanded that they do not defund the police. Okay? The black community said, we don't want you to defund the police. There is a higher crime rate. We are worried about it. We do not want you to cut funding for police. The vast majority of them did not want that. Okay. Ilhan Omar went forward with advocating for defunding the police anyway. And I was just like, okay, well, who are we representing here? Are we actually representing marginalized communities, or are we just representing what our cause believes to be right, despite what those communities desire?
Another example that's even closer to home for you, which is, which I just think is wild, is like, do you remember about a year ago in Glendale, there were all these parents who were protesting the gender curriculum at Glendale public schools, and Glendale is a largely Armenian but also just immigrant based community. It's like, probably middle class immigrants. I did go down and report on it. I didn't take the time to talk to these parents or anything, so this is just casually observing as a news consumer. But whatever you think about their critique about the curriculum, these were just parents protesting what they saw as the shortcomings of the education of their own children. And like Gavin Newsom, Adam Schiff represents Glendale, doesn't he? He represents Pasadena and I think part of Glendale. Yes. Mm-hmm. They're like going on Twitter and calling them fascists and comparing them to Nazis. And I'm just like, to me, it was like flabbergasting, because I was like, these are your voters.
Kasparian praises people like Joe Rogan and Russell Brand for breaking away from strict progressive beliefs. Unlike many left-wing commentators who say what their audience wants to hear, these figures choose to speak the truth, even if it means losing fans or support. Kasparian knows this is risky, but she thinks it's important. People who question the progressive narrative are often called names like misogynist or racist, which makes it hard for anyone to speak out. Still, she believes truth should come before popularity and respects those who are brave enough to leave behind rigid ideology. Kasparian's shift away from the left reflects a larger trend. More and more progressives feel pushed out by a movement that doesn't allow disagreement. She argues that today's left has stopped caring about real-world problems and is more focused on appearing morally pure. The pressure to conform is strong, and anyone who doesn't go along with the group is quickly rejected. But Kasparian sees this as a chance to make a change. By speaking up, she's not just criticizing her old allies, she's encouraging others to think for themselves too. The big question is, will more people join her, or will the progressive left keep closing itself off to new ideas? Either way, her story is a warning. Any movement that can't handle criticism is likely to fail.